Well, you can see the fender looks a little different. I let that primer dry. In fact, I let it dry for a couple days. This is really important when you're using spray can one-part primers. You need to make sure you let them dry very thoroughly because they tend to shrink. They tend to shrink over time a little bit. And if you put it on pretty thick and you block it out and then you top coat it either with a single stage or a base coat, clear coat, come back 4 weeks later and go, whoa! You'll see little lines, maybe some sand scratches start to come through. That's because that primer's still shrinking. So the cautions here are when you're using this type of spray can primer is don't put it on too thick. Don't try to fill a lot of imperfections and a lot of low spots with dumping a bunch of this primer. It will build up quite thick, by the way. But the problem is if you do that, then you risk having it shrink away underneath the final paint job. You may not see it for 2 or 3 months later. So, you know, I've done this is what I call my base primer coat. You saw in the last scene, I went ahead and put a couple of fairly heavy wet coats of the primer on, and I let that sit for a couple hours. Then I went ahead and sprayed on the guide coat. Look here, look at the guide coat I got. This time I got a little bit heavier. You can see that obviously I didn't just coat it black, but I got a little bit more black here because I really wanted to get down into any possible sand scratches because that's what I want to show up in this initial blocking. So I've let that thoroughly dry. Now I've pulled out all my wet sanding supplies. I mentioned that I might be dry sanding this base coat of primer, but really I decided to wet sand it, and this will give you an opportunity to see some wet sanding techniques. The other thing is this primer tends to plug quite quickly, and wet sanding does two things. One, it minimizes the dust, so this will allow me to talk while I'm sanding. The other thing is it does cut a little bit cleaner a lot longer because you can keep the paper clean by constantly applying water, and I'll show you that as we go along in this video. So you've gotten a chance to see what the base, the base primer with the guide coat looks. Now let me show you some of the tools and supplies we'll be using to block wet sand this out now. Let me begin by showing you what I've got down here on the floor. And before I do that, I'm going to put my gloves on. I highly recommend, if you're going to be doing any wet sanding, that you wear nitrile gloves. You'd be amazed after a couple hours of wet sanding, your skin, your fingertips will actually feel raw. You'll be sanding your skin off. So always wear gloves when you're wet sanding. What I've got here is I've got a big tub. That's going to catch the water running off the fender when I'm sanding it. And then I've got this bucket of clean water. I'll be using 3 types of blocks. I have a fairly stiff block right here. You can see this one. You know, it still flexes a little bit, and I'll be using this one out on the flatter surfaces of the fender. And then I've got a medium stiffness block. You can see this one has quite a bit of flex. I'll be using that more towards the front. And then I've got a very soft rubber squeegee that I use for a block when I'm going to be rolling around that front edge. Notice here I've already put my sandpaper. I've put my sandpaper in the water. I usually let that soak about 10 or 15 minutes before I start using it on the paint. And then finally what I've got here is I've got a spray bottle, and this is just full of water, maybe with just a few drops of dishwashing liquid, which helps to add a little lubricant to the water when you're sanding. So those are my wet sanding supplies. You don't have a lot of sophistication or expense here. Now let's talk a little bit more about sandpaper. When I get to this stage in the body work where I'm doing the priming and the blocking of the primer, beginning with what I call my base primer coats, and then I'll be moving on to my final primer coats. I use 4 grades. 4 grades of sandpaper, and don't buy cheap sandpaper. You know, it's hard to beat 3M made in the USA wet or dry sandpaper. There's even higher grades of sandpaper than this that some of the pros use. 280 grit is as coarse as I go in this phase of the bodywork. So for the rough phase, the initial base coat of primer, I use 280 and a 320. I'll start with 280 and block it and then finish off with 320. And then I'll come in and prime the final two coats of primer. And with those, I will use either, finish those off with either 400 or 600. Now, if I am going to be painting this fender with a single stage paint, 400 will be fine. But if I'm going to be using a base coat, clear coat, particularly a heavy silver metallic like this, my final sanding will be with 600 grit, wet or dry. I want to make sure that this is very, very smooth. You know, heavy metallic base coat, if you have even the smallest scratches in it, it can show through when you go to spray on the clear coat. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to start, and I'm going to start with the 280 grit on the stiffer block, and I'll start working this flatter area right in here first, and then we'll move on into the curvature as we pick up the more flexible blocks. Okay, I think we're ready here. Some of you are wondering what that loud noise is in the background. It is pouring rain up here, literally driving rain on the roof of my shop, and it's supposed to blow 70 miles an hour. So I apologize for that background noise, but we're going to get this done. You can see I've put my 280 on the block. Now notice I don't have to cover the whole block because I don't even have a flat surface out in here. If this were a dent out in this area of the fender, I would be using a block about that long when I did my blocking. But this is fine because I'm going to be actually having to roll this block a little bit. Before I begin, first thing I want to do is wet the fender down. You want to make sure there's absolutely no dust or grit on the surface here, because if there is, you're going to be sanding that right into the primer and possibly scratch it. In the same way here, see, I'll keep wetting the sandpaper as I go too, but I'm going to wet this down, and then I'm going to start blocking. Now I'm not going to come out and go on this edge right here with the 280. I'll do that with the 320 because there's not going to be anything going on out here. That's just overspray from when I put those two coats on. But I'll start right in here, and I'm going to start kind of in a motion like this, and you can tell right away that it's taken the guide coat off real quick. And you can see that this block, because it's so flat, isn't really doing that good of job. See that? It's only hitting the very highest spots. So I don't know about this block. I think it's probably going to be a little bit too stiff. I'll go ahead and try it up here a little bit. Okay, that's better, right up in this area. Okay, now I'm rolling off to the side here. Look at, I'll rinse this off, and you can see right away what this guide coat can tell you. You know, I'm starting to break through the primer fairly quickly, but I've got a couple areas that aren't coming off right away. So once again, keep that paper clean. This is really important. Keep the paper clean. That's why I've got that big tub below, because everything's just dripping down there. Okay, now I'm going to come back at it this way a little bit with a 45 going the opposite direction. I'm trying to check the main part of my body work first before I worry about finishing up the edges or going up to this front edge here. Okay, we'll come down in here and I'll roll the paper. See how quickly the paper plugs up, but it rinses clean very quickly. All right, look at that. I'll just show you this real quick before I go any further. Just kind of show you what the guide coat has shown me already. Is I've got some very minor low spots right in there and right in here, see? So what I'm going to do before I work this, I'm going to just keep working this area. This was the main part of my fill right here. Remember, this isn't filled out in here. It's just going to be scratches. So I'm going to work this with a 280. And I'm going to watch very carefully, because if I start breaking back through to the body filler, then I've got to stop. But, all right, see, let's see if we can keep blocking this and get rid of all those low spots. As soon as I'm getting close, see, I'm pretty happy with what's going on here. I can't get much closer than that with a stiff block. All right, let's clean that off. Clean the paper off again. Let's see what we got going here. Look at that. See, we're getting real close here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop the 280. And I'm going to pick up the 320. This, the 320, see, now I can come out and start working this little edge right here, because I really don't want anything coarser than 320 scratches out into that new paint area. We're going to probably speed this up a little bit as we go here, so that you don't have to watch this, but you might find it kind of entertaining. It's actually looking pretty good. Okay, now with the 320, I'm going to start coming back along this edge and feathering this in to the new paint. See how quickly that fills up? Now you can see if you were dry sanding here, you'd be constantly trying to clean the paper. Okay, let's roll this up along the top here. All right, now you can start to see this feather line, see, where I'm feathering in the primer with the new paint. See that right there? See that feather line? Okay, let's move on. I'm going to leave the 320 on here because I think I may not even need 280. I'm going to put this flexible block on so you can see what that does. I'm not going to do this whole thing on camera here. I think you're going to get tired of watching me sand. The main thing is for you to get the idea. Now, I'm going to hold hard, not with my fingertips, but right here with this part of my hand. Now we're going to block this. See that? And I'm going to roll it. Now, you would not be able to do this with a stiff block. Okay, look at that. No low spots. And I'm not even seeing any heavy sand scratching. Now we got, I haven't finished there, but I'm going to stop right here. And I'm going to keep sanding this. And then I'll work this front edge. I probably will have to come in here by hand and do this. See that? See how I'm rolling it? I'm just rolling this lightly, and then I'll come back here and roll it this way. Try to get the nice round edge, and it looks like all the guide coat is disappearing, so you can see here that pretty good body work. Okay, let's clean that off. All right, I've got a little more sanding to do Not much. If I break through to a couple spots in the bodywork, that's okay at this point. But you don't want a lot of breakthrough. If you have a lot of breakthrough, then your primer is going to sand faster than the Bondo or the body filler, and you'll have a wave there. So you have to be careful not to get carried away. But I think I got it here. I think I have it. I'm going to keep blocking with the 320, finish this off, and then I'll dry it down and we'll come back and take a look at it before we start adding those final 2 coats of primer. I'm very happy with how this is coming out. You can see here why you want to put a bucket below your wet sanding area. This creates quite a mess, by the way. But you can see how much nicer this is in trying to dry sand this. I did a lot of sanding, and if you look, this right here, this was about where that overspray line was when I pulled the masking tape, and look how much I've moved back. If you see a straight line, by the way, when you're wet sanding, you haven't sanded enough. That straight line is going to show up. Notice how I've got all these tapering lines here, and if you look real close, this is the edge right here. You can see the heavy sand scratches and some sand scratches in here. This is where I was doing that rough blocking with the the 180 and the 220, and even up here you can see there's a very, I mean, this is very slight flaw here because the dent was up in this area, but obviously the stress, is moving metal as far back in here. So anytime you're working a dent like this, don't just assume that the damage is only going to be local to where you see the dent. You may have issues. Even here you can see this is probably just a flaw from the factory. I mean, this is so fine, but note here as I come around this bottom edge, I'm just picking up body filler right there, and right there. So then I got a big scratch right there that was filled in. So I'm stopping at that point. This feels real nice, by the way, and it's ready for the final priming. One thing you want to remember, if you break through the body filler, you have to prime it again. Even if you break through the body filler in your final spray coating of primer, you've got to cover that again. This will show up if you don't seal it with primer. It's going to show up through your final paint, so that's a big warning. No spots of body filler allowed. Now, what I'm going to do, this is going to bring this series to an end. I'm not going to show you the final coats. I'm going to warm this up, and later today I'll shoot 2 more coats on this, and then I'm going to let this sit for 2 weeks. 2 weeks before I spray a light guide coat in final blocking with 600 and getting this ready for base coat. So I don't think you need to see that because you've already seen the process, but I hope you understand how critical it is to use blocking and to use guide coating and to progressively move to finer and finer sandpaper. See, right out in here now, all I've got is 320 scratches right out in here. So I'll be able to smooth those out. I'll prime to here, and then when I block with the 600, I'll be coming out into this area. So nothing more than 600 is going to be underneath my new base coat when I get it ready to spray. And this is kind of funny right here. I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but there's a little rock chip. I didn't even notice that rock chip because I had this masked off. So I have to come in and just spot fill that with some glazing putty, and then I can prime that when I do the final 2 coatings. So let's wrap this up with some final comments. You'll have to admit it's quite a change from when I first started hammering on this over a year ago. And now don't give me any grief because you're going to say, well, Kent, why did it take you so long? Well, I just have just a few other projects on my plate. But we're done, and you'll have to admit it looks considerably better. And I think this thing with those final 2 coats that I talked about and letting it sit for a couple weeks, I'll block this out, and then I've got some damage, a crack on the front bumper that I got to repair, and then I'll get this all ready. I'm going to send it into a professional painter to have it color matched. It's just, my days of spray painting are kind of over. I don't have the booth and the equipment to do that myself anymore. So that's where this project is going to end. I hope you enjoyed the series on how to fix a dent. Whether or not I have another series, we were laughing about, well, maybe I should do a series on how to fix a big dent, okay? And that would be a series on using all the power tools and some of the advanced techniques that some of the pros in body shops use. But once again, please keep in mind that this series here was for the DIY home guy who really wanted to just try to fix a dent in his garage or in his backyard. Don't be afraid to try this, okay? I know some of you are watching this and thinking, man, that's a lot of work. It does give you a sense of accomplishment when you actually, you know, repair something like this and it's all done and it looks like brand new. The nice thing about body work is you really can't make any bad mistakes. It's not like rebuilding an engine or a transmission. You know, if you screw up, well, you have to, you know, worst thing you have to do is grind it out and put some more in. You know, this could happen. You could be spreading it on and it could harden on you right in the middle of a spread. And if it does that, a lot of times you have to kind of grind it all off and start over again. So I would recommend, if you want to give this a try and you have a car with a few dents in it, don't start on the car. Go grab an old fender out of a wrecking yard or a piece of metal somewhere and start hammering on it with a hammer and put some dents in it and see if you can go through the whole process of filling. Practice on an old hood or an old trunk lid or an old fender. And this is going to help you get the confidence you need to tackle it on your own car. So I hope you enjoyed this series and get out there and fix your dents today.